So how do they think these newcomers are going to affect the league when they get into it? Let's get into that right now. What is up, everybody? It is Jake with Master of Football, back at it again. Happy Wednesday. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to be up to date on everything college football, pro football, Madden, EA college football, NFL draft, anything related to American football, hit that red subscribe button. You'll not be disappointed. Also hit the like button too, and follow on Twitter. Twitter fam is growing. But without further ado, let's get into the video. All right, guys, and again, here we are in the dog days of college football. Basically, that's a fancy way of saying there's nothing happening now. That being said, next month we have college football. We got 0 week. Things are going to be here before we know it. I wanted to go over a video that came out recently because, again, we're going to have some media days coming up here pretty quick. A lot of people are talking about the fact that Pac-12 is not gotten their deal done. Everybody but the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is apparently saying, oh, we will get our deal done when our deal is done. There's no requirement for us to move faster. Whatever. Yeah, put that conversation over here. I want to talk about the Big 12 because, like I said, a video that came out actually addressed a couple things about some of the newcomers into the league. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, so how do they think these newcomers are going to affect the league when they get into it? Let's get into that right now. So the first one here is from 365 Sports. Sam Bradshaw from Sikkim 365 Sports comes on this video, and he basically talks about, they said the Big 12's refusal of a Big 12 network led to the conference raid. Whatever the situation is there, you can blame Texas, you cannot. I'm not about to do that whole situation right now. However, what I am going to talk about is some of the things he mentioned. He mentioned some of the value of some of the teams. First of all, he said far and away, of the teams that were added, UCF, Cincinnati, BYU, and Houston, the most additive from a viewership member was easily BYU. BYU has, a zillion fans across the country, has an entire religion that's extremely well, watched by that religion. It's one of the only teams in the world, probably Notre Dame too, that you could say that all 6 continents, and even maybe 7 if we're including Antarctica, have people watching them when they play. They're very, very well addition there. Also mentioned about how the value of West Virginia. And West Virginia is one of those, it's an ironic thing I do with my boy, Kuz's Corner. I got Mountaineer Paul. RIP to Golden Blue Dude. I really appreciate what those guys do. West Virginia's got a huge fan base. If you guys don't know about that, I mentioned how additive they were to the league when they joined. But again, he also mentioned going forward here, what the success of these teams is going to be. I actually want to address that because we have the over-unders of them in 2023, but I want to talk about it for the future. So we see right here the over-under win totals for the new Big 12 teams in addition to the rest of the Big 12. We see the fact that the favorites right now are Oklahoma at 9.5, Texas at 9.5. Then we've got Kansas State at 8.5. We've got Texas Tech at 7.5. We've got TCU at 7.5. We got Baylor at 7.5, and so on. Now, the new guys, BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. BYU, 6 wins, over under 6 wins, meaning 5 and 7 or 6 and 6 is a 50-50 chance between those two. Well, it technically would be, that would be a push there. It'd probably be 7 and 5. I don't really know there. Cincinnati, 4.5, meaning 4 and 8 or 5 and 7, 50-50 shot between those two. Same thing with Houston there. So UCF, 6.5, meaning 6 and 6 or 7 and 5, 50-50 chance between those two, whatever the situation is there. So UCF so far is the most favorite for this next season. But again, I actually have a more important question I need to come off the camera here for. I actually haven't really done this. Now, the cool thing about this is the fact that these members all joined on July 1st. So they're only a couple days, less than 2 weeks into the Big 12 membership. But my perspective here is not so much who's going to do the best this next season. UCF so far is ranked with that. Who, in my opinion, is going to have the biggest impact long term, and who is going to win the league first? That's kind of what we're going into. That's what we're going off of. So what we're going to do, we're going to have our positives and our negatives for each of these teams in my perspective here, and then we're going to go into my ranking for the most likely to win the league and be an impactful team in the league going forward. Let's get into that list. We'll start off with alphabetical order with BYU. So we start off with BYU. Now, from a positive perspective here, things that they have that the other teams don't have necessarily is BYU has the highest decorated history of all the Big 12 newcomers. Ty Detmer, Heisman Trophy winner, national championship in 1984. Whether or not you consider that a national championship, I'm not here for you. It's gone and past. That's almost 40 years ago at this point. So we're over that whole situation here. So with that, they have the highest decorated pass. It will also improve their recruiting amongst LDS players. And again, we see here they might not always get the top guys, but all the LDS players who will transfer to BYU. In essence, what anybody doesn't know about this, I'm here in Southern Idaho, a lot of BYU fans here. And the thing about Mormon players is that typically the top 10 players, anywhere from the top 8 to the top 12, whatever that situation is, typically those top players don't go to BYU. They go to Stanford, they go to USC, they go to Oregon, something like that. Now, what I think is going to happen is that not only will they be able to cut into those players every single year, but in addition to that, anytime a Mormon player wants to transfer, and especially if he commits to Stanford, Oregon, Cal, Arizona, something like that, and he wants to transfer to a university, he can still transfer to a Power 5 league and play for BYU. That's going to be a huge impact for them. Kingsley Sumatima, I have no idea how to spell his name. He was at Oregon, was one of the top 30 players in the country, transferred to Oregon, and he's probably going to be a top 10 pick pretty quick here. But again, he is extremely solid. That feeds into the next point here, is one of the positive things about BYU. You could say what you want about their outside speed, about their defensive speed, everything like that. What you cannot condemn them for is their offensive line play. They've sent multiple players from their offensive lines to the NFL in recent years. They've always had really good offensive lines. They're one of the biggest offensive lines, very, very skilled, very good in pass pro, just good all around. That will not be an issue for them when they join the Big 12. Again, it might be issues with receivers, running backs, whatever. But we know that their offensive line is going to be able to compete with Big 12 defensive lines going forward. Now, one of the negatives I have for BYU is that it is regionally isolated. And a big issue with that is that could be a positive or a negative, whatever the situation is there. The most likely players from California who are going to play the Big 12 will play for BYU. But again, you can use that across the board there. That is going to be a positive and negative, but I think mostly a negative from this perspective. Also, the honor code will turn off some recruits. And again, they've dealt with this before, but it could have put a cap on their potential. The honor code, for those of you who don't know, no premarital sex. And if you know anything about 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old dudes who are the hottest guys on campus, that's kind of a difficult situation. So again, that could be an issue there. They've done their best to address it before. They'll have to do it even more. But again, they have a lot of positives to work with here. Up next is Cincinnati. So Cincinnati's got a lot of good things going for them. They have the most recent success of all the Big 12 newcomers. I know that UCF went to a couple, they won that national championship a couple years ago. Nobody considers that a national championship. But again, we saw the fact that Cincinnati was in line for an actual national championship, the most recent out of all these teams. And I also have the unique access of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, and Tennessee. They're reasonably close to all of those. Cincinnati's at the southern tip of Ohio. It's kind of in the middle of everything there. It's not an unrealistic drive to a lot of different places there. West Virginia has some of that. They don't have as much access to Illinois as Cincinnati does. But again, they've got a really, really unique access to a lot of fertile recruiting ground right there. And again, they've already been in a power conference. I know people might say, oh, the Big East was a joke, blah, blah, blah. I'm not here to address that whole situation. What I am here to address is the fact that them and Rutgers and Miami have already all been in a conference before. They're not scared of that whole situation. They should be just fine joining into that. So on the negative side for Cincinnati, and again, this is a little bit nitpicking here, but you can see the fact that it's a great place for a coach to grow, but not yet for them to stay. You see Butch Jones, you see Tommy Tuberville, you see Brian Kelly, you even see the fact that Luke Fickell, those guys have all gone there. They don't necessarily stay. Now, they did get a unique situation where Scott Satterfield, the former head coach at Louisville in the ACC, went to Cincinnati. I think he thinks he has the opportunity to have success there. It's kind of a nitpicky thing here, but again, it's not a positive thing from that perspective there. Some people can view it as a stepping stone school. I'm not going to go there. I do know that it is a Big 12 team, and they should be just fine there. But also, from a negative perspective, it's not too bad, but it's in solid recruiting ground, but it's not as good as some of the other newcomers that we'll get into here next with Houston. So Houston's got a lot of really good things for them going on. So for them, it is in ridiculously fertile recruiting ground, for super close. Again, they were the first non-Power 5 team to get a 5-star recruit, Ed Oliver. I know that since UCF has gotten a couple guys out there too, but again, Houston was the first, and again, he wanted to stay close to home. That's where he's from. So it's got that. It's got a fantastic president and an alumni booster, Tillman Fertitta. I mean, the dude owns the Rockets. He's got a bajillion dollars. I see him being the sort of Phil Knight for Oregon. Whether or not Houston's going to be that successful of a program, I don't really know, but I do know that he wants it to be. So they've got the upper level really, really wanting them to be really, really good. They also have the easiest geography integration into the Big 12. So if you're a recruit in Houston and somebody comes to you from UCF, somebody comes to you for BYU, somebody comes to you from Cincinnati, realistically, if you are in Houston and you commit to Houston, your families from Houston could go to 7 to 9 games without stepping on a plane. And again, that involves 8-hour drive to Stillwater, 8-hour drive to Lubbock, 4-hour drive to Fort Worth, 3-hour drive to Waco. That's actually pretty realistic for them to make those times of trips. Now, again, like I said, you could have the 6 home games and then 2 or 3 away games that aren't too far away. It's not unrealistic for that to happen. That's very, very unique that they have that the other schools don't. And then also the historical success of the program in many ways. The run and shoot with Andre Ware, the Phi Slamma Jamma in basketball, the Phi Slamma Jamma, that doesn't relate to football. I know what that is. But I am saying that if you get things right in Houston, there's so many entities around. There's so much that you can fuel that to make yourself good. We see that with a lot of what the American tried to do. The American tried to add a bunch of big metropolitan area teams because those big metropolitan area teams have things that you can't replicate, aka number of people. So if Rice ever turns its act around, I mean, they've got unbelievable education system. They've got access to players in Houston. They've got a lot of things that you can't teach. Houston has that too, and not the education requirements. They're going to be in a really, really good spot going forward. From a negative perspective, though, they have the least amount of recent success of all the additions here. They're recruiting one of the worst. They're one of the lowest level recruiting schools so far in the Big 12 in 2023 and in 2024 so far. And it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. It could, but it hasn't changed yet. Now we get to UCF. So UCF's got a lot of positives here. Ridiculously fertile recruiting ground, super close. And again, they're in the middle of Florida there. They've got a lot, Central Florida, like quite literally. They've got access to the North Florida, South Florida. They've got a really, really good spot there. The university is fully committed to winning at football. Back in the late 2000s, when USF was the number 2 team in the country, UCF was already trying to get the bounce house. They're paying for an on-campus stadium. We see the fact that USF is now trailing. They're like a decade too late. But again, we see the fact that UCF was doing their best. They really, really wanted to be successful at football. That's the most important thing for them. And they have that going on for them right now. They're recruiting really, really well. They're on a recruiting tear absolutely right now. They have tons of 4-star players. I think Cincinnati technically is the top team in 2024 because they have so many commits. But the most 4-stars out of all these new teams is easily UCF. And then we see that, again, this is very subjective here, but they seem the most excited about joining the Big 12. They're ready. We want this. We're ready. They want to be a big-time program, and they're pushing that way. Fan base, alumni, we see. Now, the alumni is actually pretty cool, and they actually mentioned in that video before that they were only playing FBS football as early as like 1996. But again, you think about they're one of the biggest universities in the country. They're going to be pumping out UCF fans, UCF fans. You see on Twitter and everything like that, there's tons of UCF fans. So I think that they've got that going for them going forward. Now, from a negative perspective here, this is a little nitpicky too, but they have to deal with the Florida effect. What I mean by the Florida effect is it is extremely difficult for Miami, Florida, and Florida State to all be good at the same time. Now you added UCF. USF will, I think, try at some point to get to that level. It's going to take them a lot longer than I think that's going to take them. But again, UCF, that's one of the big issues there is that when you have to deal with all of that, in addition to the fact that a lot of teams are coming into the state of Florida to recruit, although Houston has to deal with the same thing. Anywhere that there's a lot of really good recruits that LA schools have to deal with that. So that's not a super big situation. But I do know that, again, it's really difficult. Miami's really investing in football. Florida State's a top flight program. Florida is about to have a pay increase that is unbelievable because of being in the SEC versus the other schools. So they will have to start to be competing at that level. I think that UCF kind of got by with being like, oh, that's the cool team. But now they're going to have a target on their back. We'll see what happens there. I think they should be able to address it. And then also they're regionally isolated. Now, again, they're in a really nice region to be isolated in with a lot of recruits out there. But again, I think that for them, they can probably recruit Florida pretty easy, and they probably only have to. They're going to have a hard time recruiting Texas, hard time recruiting, anywhere outside of there. I do remember here that one big issue that Jimmy Johnson said when he was at Miami was, I can recruit backs, running backs, receivers, DBs, linebackers, anything like that really easy. He had a hard time with the offensive linemen. They do have to go outside of the state a lot of times for that. We'll see if UCF can do that. Now, my vote here, and this is highly controversial here, but most likely to win the Big 12 first, I would vote number 4, BYU. Like I said, I think that they're going to be a solid program, but they've got a lot of things holding them back in, going forward. They're going to step up in competition. Their defensive speed has to kind of improve. Cincinnati, I do think that Cincinnati has been the most consistent, I would say, out of all these teams throughout the years, because again, they're the most like, they were already in a Power 5 conference before, Power 6 conference, whatever, BCS, you guys know what I'm trying to say. UCF, again, I will say this right here. I think that most likely to win the Big 12 in 2023 is UCF. But I do think that there's going to be a little bit of growing pain. Again, you saw the fact there that it was 6.5 wins, 7-5, or 6-6 was a 50-50 shot. They're not going to win the league with 7-5. The most likely, I think, to win the Big 12 first will be Houston. It's going to take them some time to turn around. It might not happen for the first 5 years, but I do think that Houston has so many things going for it. All they're going to do is get themselves right for a little bit. Again, remember here, the thing about the SEC, I know that UCF is technically an SEC territory too, but work with me here. The SEC is the strongest conference because the players are close to where those schools are. Tommy Tuberville was a bad coach. We see Gene Chizik was a bad coach. Ed Orgeron was a bad coach. Les Miles was not a great coach. They all won national championships. Well, I actually think Tommy Tuberville didn't win a national championship. But anyways, they all won national championships because they had just such good, amazing players. Houston, I believe, has the easiest access to the best players. It's not too far from New Orleans. You have Houston right there. Dallas is not too far away. San Antonio is not too far away. It's the easiest one to recruit, I believe, in all of the Big 12. That's why I think that eventually, even it might take them a couple years to get themselves right, Houston is most likely to be the first Big 12 champ. Remember, Texas did not want Houston in the league, and now we see why. Like I said, I'm really, really big on the Houston hype train. Really, really good recruiting area. You can tell from the top down, Tillman Fertitta, owner of the Rockets, he wants them to be good too. And the fact that, again, they've done this before. Andre Ware in football, the Phi Slama Jam in basketball. If you can get things right in Houston, there is no limits. Again, they were doing that in the 80s, in the 70s and stuff like that, coming up and play with the big boys. Imagine what they can do being in the Big 12. Texas didn't want them in the league on purpose, and we're going to see why. I think that Houston is most likely to win the Big 12 first. UCF, I think in 2023 would be more likely, but going forward, I think it's Houston. All right, guys, what do you guys think of my breakdown? And again, UCF fans, I know, don't get too mad at me. That's my perspective here. If you don't like it, get in the comments and let me know why. But again, I appreciate all you guys so much. I will see you guys later. I am out.